Hello everyone, this is Bob and Threadbare, and welcome back to Threadbare Reviews. This week, Joe Cool wanted me to take a look at Gargoyles, the old 90s Disney cartoon. Now, I have covered Gargoyles before during my Deus Ex Human Revolution Let's Play, but that was years ago, it was in my old format, it was part of an LP instead of a standalone video, and I only covered the first 5 episodes. So for all of those reasons, I'm going to review Gargoyles again. But this time I'll be covering the entirety of Season 1. Still, I hope you don't mind if I cannibalize parts of the old review. The story about the story. If you really want to go back to the show's roots, and clearly I do, or else I wouldn't have brought it up, the story of Gargoyles begins 10 years before the show first aired, when Disney first began making animated TV shows. As a company with a proud tradition of taking big risks, Disney decided that if they were going to make cartoon shows, they were going to do it properly and give them a decent budget. You see, up through the 80s, most animation done for TV tended to be bad. Flat repeated backgrounds, characters with simple movements and flat colors, that sort of thing. This is because good animation is both expensive and time-consuming. However, in 1984, Michael Eisner took charge, and he had the idea of creating cartoon shows for syndication, which would allow them to charge each local network for airing rights, and thereby get them enough money to afford decent animation. Their first big success was Adventures of the Gummy Bears, back in 1985, and that in turn led to the even bigger hit of DuckTales in 1987. By 1990, Disney had enough cartoon shows going to create the Disney Afternoon, a 2-hour block of animated shows. In response to this success, Warner Bros. Stepped up its game with shows like Tiny Toon Adventures, Animaniacs, and Batman, the animated series. This last show was especially groundbreaking because it presented a kids' show with a much darker tone than usual, a family-friendly film noir, complete with moody lighting and complex villains. Batman was unafraid to get ugly and bleak at times, and so it's no wonder the kids ate it up. Gargoyles, which debuted 2 years after Batman did, was very clearly influenced by what Warner Bros. And DC were doing, to the point of using the same sort of square-jawed character designs. On the other hand, the premises of the two shows are about as far apart as you can get without straying from the superhero genre. Nobody really knows where the original idea for Gargoyles came from, but these days the main creative force is considered to be the show's producer, Greg Weisman. But that being said, he was certainly not alone in shaping the show. The 13-episode first season was almost entirely written by the married team of Michael and Bryn Chandler Reeves, and other major writers include Lydia Morano, Carrie Bates, Eric Luke, and Gary Sperling. Of course, what's really remarkable about the show is the kind of voice talent they managed to land. The lead gargoyle, Goliath, was played by the amazing voice of Keith David, and other gargoyles were voiced by Jeff Bennett and Ed Asner. They also got Jonathan Frakes to play the billionaire David Xanatos, and yes, that is the same Frakes who played William Riker in Star Trek The Next Generation. And he was far from being the only Star Trek crossover. Marina Sirtis played Deanna Troi in Demona, Michael Dorn was both Worf and Coldstone, Brent Spiner was Data and Puck, Kate Mulgrew played Captain Janeway in Queen Titania, Nichelle Nichols connects Gargoyles to the original series by being both Uhura and Diane Maza, Avery Brooks played Captain Sisko in the Alien Nokar, and then there's also guest appearances by LeVar Burton and Cole Meany. There are a ton of other famous names in the credits list, but I need to move on. Gargoyles would run for a total of 3 seasons, but there are a couple of things you should know about that. One is that while the first season has 13 episodes, the second season has 52, which is 4 times as many. The other thing is that Disney cancelled Gargoyles after the long second season, and so ABC produced the third series, which was another 13 episodes. The main voice actors didn't change when ABC took over, but most of the production crew did, including most of the writers. As such, while the third season is, well, it's not terrible, it does lack a lot of the heart and the cleverness of the first 2 seasons. As such, most fans don't consider the season canonical, and Season 3 has never been released on DVD. That said, it is on Disney Plus if you're curious. The review. In the year AD 994, gargoyles are a fact of life in medieval Scotland. Gargoyles are monstrous in appearance and far more powerful than humans, but they are vulnerable during the day when they turn into stone statues. Mentally, the gargoyles are identical to humans, but because of those physical differences, they are largely despised by humans, even though they protect the castles of Scottish lords against Viking raiders. The leader of the gargoyles of Castle Wyvern is Goliath, a name given to him by humans, since gargoyles don't use names. Although the reason they don't is pretty blatantly so that the show can give them New Yorker names once they get to Manhattan. After a daylight raid conquers the gargoyles' castle and the Norsemen destroy most of the helpless statues, a magus blames the survivors for the attack and traps them in stone until the castle rises above the clouds. 1,000 years later, in 1994, a billionaire named David Xanatos moves the castle to the top of his Manhattan skyscraper, thereby breaking the spell and freeing the enchanted gargoyles. However, Xanatos' tower is soon attacked by armed mercenaries, and so he convinces Goliath and the others to retaliate and retrieve his lost data, assisted by Goliath's mate, whom he had thought was killed during the Viking raid. However, Goliath also befriends police detective Elisa Maza, and thanks to Maza, Goliath realizes that Xanatos deceived him into attacking his business competitors. He also discovers that his mate, now called Demona, may have been awake for a lot longer than him, plus she betrayed Castle Wyvern to the Vikings. All of that happens in the first 5 episodes. After that, we get introduced to a slew of additional villains. The Pack is a group of mercenaries named after Canids who start out as TV stars but get arrested when people spot them attacking civilians while fighting the gargoyles. Demona tricks the gargoyle Brooklyn into casting a mind control spell on Goliath, and Broadway develops a hatred of guns when he accidentally shoots Elisa while helping her take down the crime boss Tony Dracon. A bounty hunter named Macbeth shows up to hunt the gargoyles, though he's mostly interested in Demona, and then when Xanatos gets out of jail, he tests out a new armor suit by hunting Goliath across the city. The show then starts to expand on backstories, as the old gargoyle Hudson reminisces about hunting the old Grand Magus back in the 10th century, and Xanatos hires Elisa's brother as a helicopter pilot, partly because he's a good pilot, but mostly to mess with Elisa. Finally, Xanatos and Demona piece together some bits of broken gargoyle to create Coldstone, who fights the gargoyles until he comes to his senses, but then falls into the frozen Hudson River. The first thing I should say is that, while the animation was good for a mid-90s cartoon, it's a lot less impressive by today's standards. Modern TV animation is much more fluid, and it takes advantage of high-definition screen resolutions. As such, a lot of animation faults and shortcuts that a fuzzy screen couldn't render are now clearly visible. But all of that is details. In the broad strokes, the animation is perfectly able to convey action, emotions, moods, and scenes. The character designs are all distinct and recognizable, whether human or otherwise, and even though most of the show takes place at night, it still manages to be colorful and vibrant. And besides, the best part of Gargoyles isn't the animation, it's the acting and the writing. You can tell in this first season that the show is setting up a lot of things for the future. Villains hint at unseen backstories, enemies are introduced who don't get killed on screen, and in particular, each of the 3 young gargoyles get their own personal villains so that we can have episodes that focus on each of them in the future. Plus, you know something has got to happen to Elisa's brother. That status quo isn't going to last. And that brings up another thing. This show has continuity and progress. Over on the Batman animated series, each episode is pretty much self-contained. If a villain appears more than once, the show will acknowledge that they've come back, but the status quo will be restored by the end of the episode. In Gargoyles, however, actions have long-term consequences that play out over multiple episodes. Xanatos gets arrested at the end of the opening arc and doesn't leave prison until episode 9. Elisa gets shot in episode 8 and has to use a crutch to get around for another 2 to 3 episodes. And later in season 2, one of the characters will get married, get pregnant, and eventually give birth. The writing also contributes to the strength of the villains. David Xanatos has lent his name to a trope called the Xanatos Gambit, which is when the villain stacks the deck so that even if the heroes succeed in stopping his main plot, he still gets away with something. For instance, in The Edge, we think that Xanatos wants to kill Goliath in his new gargoyle power armor, and he certainly wouldn't mind if he had, but mostly he just wanted to put the armor through a live combat test run, and he's quite pleased with the results. Then, in an early Season 2 episode, he and Anton Severius put on a whole song and dance routine that completely fools the Manhattan Clan. The key element here is that the villains don't always fail. And between that and their complex motivations, the villains of Gargoyles are a lot more compelling and dangerous than your average superhero cartoon. So while the animation is a little rough around the edges, Gargoyles is still a great cartoon for viewers of all ages. It has a strong voice cast, a great story, a compelling music score, amazing characters, and better continuity than a lot of modern prestige dramas. If you get the opportunity, give it a watch. The analysis. As a TV show with a lot of episodes, and as a kids show that wants to both teach and entertain, Gargoyles has a lot more than just one theme. Some of the more blatant themes of the day include gun safety, literacy, and the value of teamwork, but of all the themes the show touches on, the three most prominent would have to be trust, betrayal, and prejudice. The Gargoyles defend Castle Wyvern from the Vikings, but because of their frightening appearance and their inhuman strength, they aren't trusted by the human inhabitants. So Demona and a human who prefers the Gargoyles betray the castle to the Vikings to get rid of the humans. But of course the Vikings trust Gargoyles even less, and so they destroy them. Xanatos pretends that he's helping the Gargoyles, and he fabricates an enemy for them to fight, but then it turns out that he was lying to them the whole time. On the other hand, Elisa proves herself to Goliath by protecting him during the day. And so because of her, Goliath is able to start trusting humans again. Thus, because Goliath trusts Elisa, he discovers that Xanatos is manipulating him and can take measures against him. But because Demona betrays the humans, the Vikings destroy her clan. When it comes to trust and distrust, both are most often repaid in kind. The theme of prejudice is merely an extension of this theme of trust and distrust. After all, prejudice is a decision you make to trust or distrust someone based on surface traits. What race or ethnicity does a person belong to? What gender and or sex are they? What nation are they from? What's their job? How do they dress? All of these factors combine into a snap judgment we make based on our societal mores, our parents' beliefs, and our personal preferences and experiences. Sum it all up, and you get either trust or distrust. And we do have to decide one way or the other quickly. Trust is better for everyone, especially in the long run, but the consequences of someone betraying that trust can be so dire that we can't afford to hand it out lightly. Gargoyles is a show about a lot of things, but its strongest themes are trust, betrayal, and prejudice. Incidentally, it's also a show whose male and female leads are both minorities and are voiced by minority actors. And while these facts come up in a few episodes, who they are is not fully defined by where their ancestors came from. Thanks for joining me again for today's Threadbare review, and I hope I'll see you next time. Until then, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and if you have a little extra money to spare, you can support me on Patreon. Link in the description.